is Thursday, October 22nd, 2020. This is a joint hearing of the Judiciary and Public Safety, Finance and Policy Committees. This is a joint committee that was put together some time ago for the purposes of hearing testimony and collecting information on the riots that occurred in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and some of our suburbs the end of May and into June of 2020. We have completed our investigation. We have held the hearings, collected information, and produced a report that is dated October 2020, and it is dated Review of Lawlessness and Government Responses to Minnesota's 2020 Riots. The specific reason that I have called this hearing this morning is to give all of the members of this joint committee an opportunity to make any comments that they wish to make. I will tell you that a week ago I sent out an email to all of the joint committee members indicating to them that we would be having this hearing today. And to the extent that any member wishes, we would hear their comments. And if, in fact, any member wanted to submit any specific concurrences or dissents with respect to any or all of the report, that they would be welcome to do so. Also indicated that they could submit, if they so choose, any written documentation up until today, up until this hearing. And if they wish to submit it beforehand, they could submit that to the Transportation Committee CA, Pat Calusa. As of right now, I'm not aware of any kind of written documentation that has been submitted to Mr. Calusa by any member of the joint committee. I think that, frankly, the most important part of the committee hearings and the report are where do we go from here? And that is really part of why I would encourage members to weigh in on, what does the future hold for us when it comes to these riots? We have seen since the end of May an increase in violence in the state of Minnesota, particularly in the Twin Cities area. I have little or no doubt in my mind that Minnesota will experience riots in the future. They are part of our past, none to the extent that we experienced in the summer of 2020, but they are part of our history. So I do expect that they will happen again. And so in that respect, the recommendations that are included in the report, I think, are really important. And I am going to read into the record this morning exactly what those recommendations are. And I'm going to do so because it's possible anyone listening to this tape in the future would not necessarily have a copy of the report in front of them. And if we are to learn from the mistakes of the past so we don't repeat them in the future, the recommendations that are listed in the report, I think, are really very important. So at this point, I'm going to read into the record this list of recommendations, after which I will call on members for any comments that they wish to make. I will then make some very brief closing comments, and we will adjourn. As to the list of recommendations that are in the report beginning on page 46, they are as follows. Number one, public safety being a core function of government, law enforcement at all levels of government must be provided with the necessary equipment, personnel, and authority to confront and stop riots before they escalate. Number two, those who commit criminal acts under the guise of social protest must be arrested and prosecuted. Number three, Governor Walz and his administration must recognize the danger of not addressing criminal activity and their affirmative duty to act as necessary to protect the public during riots. Number four, the Minnesota Department of Public Safety should develop a comprehensive plan in cooperation with cities, counties, and the Minnesota National Guard to prevent and address rioting. Number five, elected leaders in both the executive and legislative branches must recognize that public safety is a critical need. Bipartisan support and cooperation to protect the safety and security of Minnesotans in the face of rioting is a duty that must be fulfilled. Number six, to prevent riots before they ignite, Minnesota and America owes itself a frank and open conversation about social justice. Such a conversation is imperative to the process of rebuilding trust and will help us determine how we can reach a point where all communities, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, or cultural background, can be confident that they are being treated fairly and equally by society. Number seven, governors must activate the National Guard when necessary and without hesitation to assist law enforcement in controlling the rioting and protect the public. The 2020 riots are not likely the last episodes of lawlessness this state will experience. With the nation deeply divided by political, economic, and social tensions, even a small incident could spark a new wave of lawlessness. The time to begin preparing for the next time is now. These recommendations address the indecision, confusion, and leadership vacuum on display at the end of May and the beginning of June. They are not the result of they are the result of hours of expert testimony about the fallout from the riots. Minnesota leaders should adopt these recommendations to better prepare for another outbreak of violence. Governor Walz, local mayors, and city officials must immediately begin the process of implementing these recommendations. The Minnesota Senate stands ready to assist in that process. The number one responsibility of elected leaders is to preserve public safety and order. Minnesota's elected officials must ensure our state will never again suffer the negative consequences or episodes of lawlessness that resulted from the 2020 riots. That concludes the list of recommendations that are in the report. And at this point, I would call on any members that wish to comment with respect to the hearings or the report. Senator Yazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the committee for coming together on this. I think it's been very, very interesting. I think we've learned a lot in these testimonies. And I was just looking at an article from the Star and Tribune, which is good. It was dated October 19th, and I won't read the whole thing, but one of the comments that says city and state officials have city and state officials say they have learned from the unrest following the death of George Floyd and will better respond to trouble in the future. So I believe a lot of that learning came from our committee here and what we've discovered and the testimony that we've received from law enforcement, from business owners, and from citizens across Minneapolis and St. Paul. So again, I think this was a very worthwhile committee. I want to thank you and the members for being involved with this. I think it's a very interesting report, and I think a lot of people should read it through thoroughly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Uzinski. Any other members want to make any comments? Senator Ingebretson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members for putting the time in with regards to what's turned out to be one of the worst criminal situations that Minnesota has ever seen, and actually one of the, I understand, worst ones in the United States when it comes to damage and property. It was quite telling, a couple different areas of the report. I'll start out on page 1, and I'll go and I'll give a few other members a chance to identify a few things, but it was very clear on page 1 under the report summary. Number 2 really stuck out to me. The philosophical conflict caused a hesitation to confront ideological allies. Minnesota Governor Walz and elected leaders identified what the causes promoted by the demonstrators. They were basically what that means, and it was very clear. It's very clear when you watched the interviews, when you watched what was happening out there, that I think there was a real will to hope this was going to go away, because it was thought by the leaders, and I'm talking again the governor and the mayor, that this is going to go away. This can't be happening in Minnesota. And what a terrible incident that happened down in South Minneapolis, and they just simply didn't know how to and couldn't believe that this was happening. And during that time of revelation, the fires were starting, and people were starting to lose their businesses, and people were getting hurt. And I was asked in another interview, Mr. Chair and members, what I, as a rural legislator, really care, what I can do about this, and why would I be so concerned coming from Alexandria out in rural Minnesota. And if you look on page 3, you'll see key conclusions. On number 5, the Minneapolis City Council's history of inadequately funding the police department, while those proposing to eliminate or defund them pose a danger to citizens throughout Minnesota. I think what that means, Mr. Chair, is that Minneapolis used to be, and I think it still is, let's say that, it still is a good place to come and visit. It's, and it has, I mean, it's the Twin Cities is the capital of our state, a lot of different things to do here, and people come from all over the state. I think there's going to be a hesitation. In fact, I've heard people say, I'm not going to go back there. I'm just simply not going to go back there because they don't have the adequate forces. As the report will show later on, just exactly how much crime has been going on since the beginning of these riots. So that's why I'm concerned, is my people come down here, I guess my constituents come down here, and they're afraid that they're not going to be protected. And with the shortage of public safety not being addressed, at least as far as I know, it's not being addressed. I continue to watch the news and actually know the chief of police quite well, and he seems to be pleading for more help, and it's not happening. And what's happening is more and more crime. And of course, the key facts on page 2, the deaths that were part of this, is something that, horrible things that happen, and this is not supposed to happen in Minnesota. This is not supposed to happen in the Midwest, where Minnesota nice is. So I think a lot of folks got caught off guard, didn't know how to react, and the results were devastating. And hopefully people are going to have to eventually have to pay for that. I mean, there's one way that you can change that, and that's by changing your attitude. And if that doesn't happen as an elected official, you have to go. Simple as that. So I'll stop right there. If anybody's got some other ones, I'll look a little further in here, Mr. Chair. But again, thank you for calling this committee and looking into this, and and thank those that were here to testify, because it wasn't easy.
Thank you, Senator Ingebretson, and I would add parenthetically that I see underfunding the Minneapolis Police Department as a threat to not only the folks who live in Minneapolis, but I see it as a threat to the entire state of Minnesota. It is the largest city in the state of Minnesota, and by not having an adequate police force to take care of the danger of criminal activity poses a threat to all of us. Senator Osmek.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And the lack of leadership shown by the mayor of Minneapolis and the governor is stark. And I'm just going to point to one part of the lack of leadership, and it's the disinformation that the mayor and the governor have engaged in. Misleading the public. That's what it is, misleading the public. It's on page 13. It discusses the residency of the rioters that were arrested. And right at the beginning of this sordid episode, to put it mildly, the mayor of Minneapolis said, quote, said the protesters are, quote, are coming in largely from outside of the city, outside of the region, to prey on everything we have built over the last several decades, unquote. This is a quote from the mayor of Minneapolis. On page 13, you see what the arrest records are. And this is the only objective. I mean, we can't identify everyone. There were thousands of people. But you can certainly use the arrest records as an indicator as far as who was there, who was doing the rioting. The mayor says it's not people from Minneapolis. Well, look at the arrest records from June 25th, or from, I'm sorry, May 25th to June 2nd. 91 out of the 118, 91 came from within the metropolitan area. That isn't a minority of rioters. That's the vast majority. Almost 80% of the rioters were from Minneapolis or the metropolitan area. You know, this disinformation and speaking without knowing what you're talking about only fans the fuel, or fans the flames of what was happening. I mean, he said, the mayor said to people something that was factually wrong. He had no clue. And then to add insult to injury, then you get the mayor, or the governor of the state of Minnesota echoing the same thing. Governor Walz said he estimated as much as 80% of those destroying property in the cities were not locals. 80% were not from, supposedly, not from the metropolitan area. The reality is 80% were from the metropolitan area. It's amazing the lack of leadership that the governor and the mayor of Minneapolis displayed in this episode, and the disinformation that the governor and the mayor of Minneapolis provided to social media, to newspapers, the quotes that were wholly inaccurate. I have a suggestion for the mayor of Minneapolis and the governor. If you don't know what you're talking about, shut up. Don't say anything, because you're not helping. We need leadership in this state that protects our citizenry and our property from lawless looting and vandalism. These two people, these two elected officials, failed. And I love how the governor loves to say, it's mine and I own it. I can't tell you how many times he says he owns this and he owns that. You know, if he owned this many things, his garage would be full of things that he owns. But the reality of the situation is, when the governor of the state of Minnesota says, I own something, what he's actually saying is, I don't own it, because he doesn't take responsibility for his mistakes. And it's as simple as that. And I hope the citizens of Minnesota understand that we in the Senate are taking what happened in May and June in Minnesota very seriously so that this doesn't happen again. You know who else doesn't take this seriously? The state of Oregon and the city of Portland. You don't hear a lot about them, but things burn every day, it seems like, in those cities because they have no leadership either. Fortunately, in our state, we do have a functional body called Minnesota Senate that is holding people accountable. And I hope that we continue to hold accountable, not just the governor, but all levels of government here in Minnesota accountable for these actions. This cannot continue in Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Osmick. Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, as a retired firefighter and a retired National Guard soldier, what really interested me was on page 9, where it says firefighters were not able to fight fires. You look at that, that first bullet point says, at one point during the riots, Minneapolis firefighters quit responding to arsons only to respond to medical emergencies because they did not feel safe due to being attacked and having their gear stolen. And that's a key point, because the one thing that is very difficult for a firefighter to do is stand around on your piece of your apparatus and watch something burn and have that helpless feeling that you can't respond to do anything. The other key thing that you look at is that second bullet point: without direction from the Governor Walz or the city of Minneapolis, the Adjutant General, John Jensen, had to tell Governor Walz that the Minnesota National Guard was going to protect the firefighters until the city had the situation under control. That didn't come from the governor. That didn't come from Mayor Fry. That came from the National Guard, General Jensen, identifying that they had a problem, and the only way those folks were going to get to respond to those fires was with an escort of the National Guard, because the Minneapolis Police Department and the St. Paul Police Department were overwhelmed. No guidance. They just made the decision because there was a lack of decision-making at the highest levels of both Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota. You look at the third bullet. They didn't protect our people. We were all on our own. The fire engine, when the building, the apartment complex that was under construction was burning, they said the fire engine, which is the apparatus, was just sitting there, but they wouldn't do anything. That's because they couldn't do anything, because once they would have, what people don't understand is once they start pumping water, that engine is a target. It is stationary. It cannot move. And without being safe, and that's what you're taught, is make sure the scene is safe before you go in. They couldn't make sure the scene was safe. When you look at this, just in St. Paul, on that last bullet, St. Paul Fire Department responded to over 1,150 calls for service in 6 days. Having been a firefighter, I can't imagine responding to that many fires in 6 days. Because usually a major fire it's tough to recover, to respond again. I will say that I'm appalled by the misrepresentation that the governor and Mayor Fry did on this occasion. When they, after this had happened, they should have been immediately trying to decide what they were going to do to prevent this from happening again. You talk to business owners and they said, you know, I've got insurance, I can rebuild. But what I am concerned about is what happens the next time. What happens? Is this going to happen to me again in 6 months? Am I going to be able to be in the operation? How is this going to work? And what you find that the Governor Walz and what Mayor Fry did was they began to point fingers at one another. They didn't put down and start working on how to prevent this from happening again, they actually went after and started pointing fingers. That's where you're going to get 19-year-old cooks come from out of Governor Walz's mouth. Why, especially a National Guard, a former National Guard, a retired National Guard soldier, one of the highest ranked enlisted people in the National Guard as being at one time worked as a command sergeant major, didn't attain that rank, but worked at that. And he doesn't understand that there are high quality National Guard soldiers, as you could tell by how they responded to these riots. And instead of working to try and put something together to make sure they have a response plan, they point fingers at one another and try to point blame on whether they had a appropriate request or not. And that's a whole nother timeline that somebody else can look into, as far as when it looks like Wednesday morning they requested help from the National Guard, and a formal request that evening, and the governor could not make a decision whether to put the National Guard in play or not. Appalling. Hopefully they have learned a lesson. I hope that they go forward and start planning, but I don't have a lot of confidence. I've lost confidence in both those individuals. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Howell. Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess for me and a lot of the people that have watched the last few hearings that we've had in this committee, I think we've departed and we've gone into a new area of being that I certainly wasn't prepared for when it comes to the Minnesota Senate Transportation Committee. I think we've done so rather justified, though. I think we've been justified in our actions when it comes to these committee hearings. And I want to compliment this synopsis. I think this is the culmination of several committee hearings. It's the culmination of something that really needed to be looked into. I think we have to have an answer at the end of the day on what happened over the last 6-8 months, what may happen in the future, how we as a state are going to respond to those events. And really what this is I think, is of a what not to do. This is, in one way, I think it's a roadmap. It's a roadmap that we should not follow. For me, this goes back beyond just the events of May and early June. It goes back to last fall when I heard the Minneapolis Police Commissioner Arredondo say that we needed more cops back then. That's something where it was, maybe something that the news media should have been covering. And in all honesty, I'm a little disheartened by the fact that we don't have any news media here today. This looks to be somewhat of a single party representation sitting at the table here, where I think this is a very worthwhile effort. But last fall, we heard Chief Arredondo say that he needed 400 additional officers on top of the 888 that he had been authorized by the city's charter. I think he was very justified in saying so. He could see the writing on the wall 6 months in advance. And the lack of that funding last fall, and of course hindsight is 2020, but even at that point in time, I think myself as an greater Minnesota state senator could see those let's just call it kindling, let's call it tinder, starting to align itself. We started to see those events long in advance, and then when you have not only a spark but a gallon of fuel dumped on that tinderbox in the state of Minnesota when it comes to George Floyd's death, and I think we all watched that and the events that unfolded afterwards. And over the course of a week, again, just an outstate greater Minnesota state senator could see the events unfolding and the lack of anything happening over that course. And the fact that we have this little document right here that lays it out step by step how the things went. I'm going to agree with Senator Osmick here, and the state of Minnesota really needed some leadership and really needed some people to step up in a quick, timely frame. And we didn't have that. You know, we had to call in the National Guard, which I'm very proud of the work that the National Guard did. And I think that when we saw General Jensen sitting here at the testifier table, that you could see the frustration in his face. Not only that he had to rescue the state, but that he was called to do something that he wasn't necessarily prepared to do. We have a very talented force in the state of Minnesota, but this is not something that the National Guard should be or is really tasked to do on a regular basis. But yeah, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the fact that you put this committee hearing together. I'm proud to be on the Transportation Committee, even when we look into things that I wouldn't think that we would have to. We have a very challenging set of months coming up, not only in the legislature, but when it comes to socio and economic problems that may proceed with the eventual court case that's going to be happening. I think that this is an example of what not to do. So with that, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lang. And you did touch on Minneapolis City Council. No one has commented on that yet. And it is covered in the report. And I believe that the Minneapolis City Council and the lack of funding and the lack of providing for adequate police force in the city of Minneapolis directly contributed to the severity of these riots, and will ultimately directly contribute to the danger in the state of Minnesota if the city of Minneapolis and its city council do not take corrective action in order to fully staff, fully equip the Minneapolis Police Department. And in that, the Minneapolis City Council really did play a major hand in what has occurred. And I do hope that the media that is watching this hearing agrees with me and reports on that aspect of the riots also. Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, with this report, there are so many concerns, I'm not really sure where to start. I would encourage everybody to read this. Thank you to everyone that participated in putting this in. Mr. Chair, as I start here, I want to ask you, was the DFL colleagues, were they asked to add anything they wanted to this report also?
Senator Hall, the answer is yes. I had sent out an email to all members of this committee so that any member that wished to submit either remarks that are concurring or dissenting, or submit documents that are concurring or dissenting, that they would have the opportunity to do so. Then they would have an opportunity from the time I sent that email out, which approximately a week ago. They could send the information to either myself or to the committee administrator, Pat Kalusa, or they could do it on the day of the hearing. So the
Thank you,
answer
Mr.
is
Chair.
unequivocally yes.
So I'm assuming then they agree with this report, which has, again, so much in it. But let me say this in the beginning. The lawlessness that is shown in this report, the documentation of it, needs to be stopped in its tracks. I look back at those days of the riots, and I kept on saying, why is this not being stopped right now? What is going on? And as we further get through, and the report shows the politics and the ideologies of those in Minneapolis and the governor seem to make this event bigger than it ever needed to be. And make no charge that this is and does affect our suburbs, where I come from. I've talked numerous times, including this morning, with our chief of police. And we see the ripple effect trying to come out to the suburbs, and it will come out to the rural areas. So we need to change some of this stuff. The fear that's being propagated here is crippling to our communities. My community hardly wants to go downtown Minneapolis. First off, they figure there's not a whole lot open, but they're afraid to. Or those that I know and live in Minneapolis are afraid to go to the parks these days. Let our cops do the job they were trained to do. Senator Ingebretson over here was a sheriff. He was trained in certain things, and there's vast fields that he is trained in. Let him and others do their job. Let's stop throwing our cops under the bus, which I'm finding too often politically. Somehow that is a good thing to do. That should never be a good thing to do. As I've stated before, there are bad apples in every job, every employment, including the employment that I came from, which was being a Christian minister. There are bad ministers out there because there is sin in this world. So to me, and looking at this report, the key problems here comes from leadership, and the leadership really is always the key. We need to stop pointing fingers. Minneapolis and the governor need to stop pointing fingers at each other. Maybe they need a paradigm shift. Maybe they need to think about things a little differently. I think it was the governor that said he questioned whether police force would help or hurt in the situation. And, you know, again, let the cops, they know how to handle these things and take their opinion. It's called law and order. Let me say that again. It's called law and order. So, you know, how we view our police is important. How we view the law is important. And we need to stand up and decide to do the right thing no matter what the political outcome is. You need to do the right thing. And if there's a paradigm shift, because I think the other side of the aisle thinks differently than I do on what the right thing to do is. I've seen that over and over as we push buttons around here. Maybe they need to take a look at what law and order means to this side of the aisle. And we need to look at peaceful protests are really good, and they're okay. But when that goes over the line of a peaceful protest to unpeaceful, we need to get politics out of there, and we need to stop it completely. And I want to say to our police officers, you guys are the good people. You're doing a good job. Thank you for all that you do for our communities. We need you. We need you. We appreciate you. We can't say that enough to them. We need to quit throwing our police officers under the bus. So I guess that's where I want to end. I believe that there were some major problems that happened here. The report says them really well. I hope the press looks at this report and says, you know, this is exactly what happened in our hearings. So, Mr. Chair, thank you for not only allowing me to speak, but thank you for putting this together, you and Senator Limmer. Appreciate your leadership.
Thank you, Senator Hall. Senator Yazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Hall. I'm not going to reiterate everything you said because I agree with every single thing you said. Our law enforcement are fantastic people. I know in greater Minnesota, my district, they are very highly held by our citizens in what they do for us. And to have someone to go to bed at night or be able to travel and feel safe is the ultimate thing that we want to hear. So the last thing I want to say, and then I'll be done for the day, but my concern is, you know, when I ran for the Senate, Senate in 2016, I saw people leaving Minnesota because of certain things, high taxes or things like that. But what this is adding to that, and the exodus we're seeing out of the state of Minnesota for if it's high taxes or lack of law, things like that, we need, or restrictions, there's so many things. What happened in this year of 2020 is going to take us years to come back from financially, from people, just the feel of safety. We need to make sure that we get back on order, get law and order in place, and keep our citizens here, make them feel safe so they stay in Minnesota and not exit the state. You obviously see in the news that South Dakota is attracting people and businesses to come to South Dakota, and you're seeing it happen. Minnesota is losing businesses, they're losing people because the lack of leadership. We need to be strong in our law enforcement, keep people in Minnesota, and make them feel safe. So again, Senator Hall, thank you for all your comments. I think they were great. Senator Howe as well. This was a great hearing, great committee that we worked on. Brought a lot of things to the surface that I think need to be said. Not always politically easy to do that, but it had to be said. And I know in my district, no matter where I go, this is people's concern. They want to know that Minnesota is going to be safe and that we are going to do better in the future to address these issues, because most people love Minnesota and they want to stay here. But if they don't feel safe and they can't afford it, they're going to leave. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Jasinski, I agree. One of the things that I continually hear when I'm out talking to folks is, in terms of issues that are of concern to them in a normal election cycle, it's usually education, jobs, economy, that type of thing. One of the things that is first and foremost in people's minds right now is public safety. And it comes as a direct result of what occurred in this state the end of May and first part of June. Senator Ingebretson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I do come from the law enforcement community, and it's near and dear to me, and I see what's going on. I look at the report on page 37, and I look at the plummeting police morale comments there. Can you imagine? In fact, they testified in front of us here, Mr. Chair and members, that this was their home. This was their home away from home, the 3rd Precinct, and they were ordered to stand down. Actually, some of them didn't know if they were going to make it out. I'm a law enforcement officer, and I just don't understand that. I don't understand that rationale of thinking, and that's why some of the senators today made the comment, let the police deal with crime. That's what you hire them for. You don't hire them to go out and be social workers. I must ask, where are the social workers? Since there's no media here, and I find that rather shocking, 3 of us stood in front of the media just after this had started, asking the federal government to come in and evaluate the Minneapolis Police Department. And I was asked a couple of different questions about what would 3 rural senators, one from Rochester, one from Western Minnesota, and myself, would really care. Why would we care about this? And I said, well, when you talk about defunding the police, I said, this is going to be a maze of crime. The gangbangers and all the professional criminals out there are sitting there wringing their hands, and they're just going, wow, this is great. There's not going to be any cops. So what happened? Between May 25th and the 15th, there were almost 20 homicides and upwards of 140 people shot in Minneapolis. I think it's important to read these. As of September 1st, there have been 56 murders in Minneapolis in 2020. There are 8 more homicides than in all of 2019 in Minneapolis. As of September 15th, 400 people have been shot in Minneapolis in 2020. As of September 3rd, St. Paul had 23 homicides in 2020. This is a 50% increase over 50% increase over 2019 murders during the same period, reporting period. According to the police, crime has increased because criminals feel embodied. emboldened and embodied. My goodness, what would you expect? There's open drug sales going on, gun violence, robbery, assaults, skyrocketing, 787 carjackings. And I understand they're going on in the middle of the snowstorms that we've just recently had. If you don't have police out there, this is going to continue. Folks, Minneapolis is just crying out for help. I've had many emails asking for just that. And I'm going to finish with a couple of questions. I understand that there was some tweeting going on by, at least in the report, by the governor's daughter. I don't even know how old she is, and I'm the last one to want to drag family into anything, especially political. But when they're bold enough to bring in warning devices and warn their friends or whatever about crime activity and how it's going to be responded to by in this case, the National Guard, that's basically aiding and abetting. And I guess, Mr. Chair, I'll ask you the question, and maybe somebody else here can answer it. Has that been investigated? And here's another one, the one on page 8. There was a email to the Minneapolis Police Department by obviously obviously a criminal. How do you feel about the 3rd precinct burned and destroyed? I feel good, excellent, ha. That was good, and the word I can't explain at the end. Was that investigated? Emails can be followed up on. I don't know that it has been. Tony Boza once said when he came to the state of Minnesota that if you don't take care of the small things when it comes to law and order, they're just only going to excel. So if you don't take care of that loud muffler, if you don't take care of that tinted window, that seems pretty small compared to this, but if you don't do that, things are going to escalate into bigger things. And it's just amazing to me that we have to even have such a meeting, and Minnesotans need to know that we are here. We do care. It's very clear the other side of the aisle doesn't, because they're not here, and they didn't even so much as send in any ways to resolve this. And my final question would be, who's going to pay for this? The good senator from Rochester sitting next to me here went through an awful lot of pressure about, well, this bonding bill is going to pay for Minneapolis. Don't vote for it. It's all going to go to Minneapolis. Well, we all know that that's not true. We know that that's not true. I will never vote for a bonding bill that will have to help repair Minneapolis. Unfortunately, Minneapolis is going to have to pay for their own, whether it be through taxes, whether it be through insurance. But millions and millions of dollars are going to have to be, you're going to have to come up with. So, folks, this idea that we're going to drag law enforcement through the mud continuously over one or two bad apples is unconscionable to me. And if you're going to have a lack of even finding anybody to want to work in law enforcement, and then you know what's going to happen? We're all going to be affected. We all were affected by this, but it's going to be even worse. Or they're going to go into the alley. They're going to be driving down the street, and they're going to see some criminal activity in the corner over here in an alley. And they're going to look at that and they're going to go, oh, you know what? Senator Senjum over here has got a car parked by a fire hydrant. I'm going to go over there and write him a parking ticket instead. Is that the kind of law enforcement we want? Because they know they're going to go in there and they're going to be put on trial as soon as they step out of the car. So we better wake up, Minnesota. The nation better wake up, because we're in for a long ride if we don't start supporting them and stepping on top of this is immediately when it happens, and it will happen again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Ingebretson, in response to the questions that you posed, any type of criminal prosecution for wrongdoing involving these riots, in my estimation, would fall to the responsibility of the city attorney in Minneapolis and St. Paul and the county attorney in Hennepin County and in Ramsey County. Ongoing criminal investigations are something, of course, that they don't comment on, but I would agree with you that I certainly hope that criminal investigations with respect to the folks that were involved in these crimes, in addition to, of course, the people that were involved with tearing down the Columbus statue. I know that one person is being investigated, or is being prosecuted, I should say. And the word is that he is going to be subjected to restorative justice, whatever that is. But I'm not aware of anybody else that were on those ropes tearing that statue down that have been charged with a crime, and I think that in itself is a crime. So as to your question, Senator Engebretson, who's going to pay for this? I can tell you that the state of Minnesota has already had to pay for a significant amount of overtime by law enforcement, mutual aid law enforcement coming in from outstate to help with the riots. And of course, mobilizing the National Guard is not a cheap thing. And so the state of Minnesota is on the hook for those kinds of financial responsibilities. And of course, there's nothing that we can do about that. Those are state assets and we have to pay for them. Senator Osmek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Engebretson, one additional question that we all should be asking is, what are the consequences? You know, it's one thing to have lawless behavior. It's one thing to have rioters throwing bricks through windows. It's one thing to get through the emergency. But what's the consequences for the rioters and the looters and the lawless behavior? From what I can see, and I give you static every once in a while because you like to fish, and you practice many times catch and release. Well, that's what this has become, is catch and release. There's no consequences. In this report, it doesn't really say it. I'd love to actually find out how much jail time for the people who are identified here, the 118 arrests in Minneapolis and the 18 arrests in St. Paul, how many of them actually spent more than a few days in jail? Had to pay restitution, spent a week or a month in jail, and how many of them were bailed out by a fund created to let them get back on the streets and go do it all again? Because if there are no consequences to your actions, what the hell? Might as well go do it again. You know, the chair sort of stole my thunder because we just found out now, and maybe I'll just briefly talk about it. We just now found out what the county attorney of Ramsey County is going to do about a piece of property that was damaged, being torn down by a rope by more than one person. I'll mention it. It's the statue of Christopher Columbus. This has nothing to do with Christopher Columbus, whether you like or dislike the man in our history. It's got nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with a piece of property owned by the state of Minnesota being destroyed by people on camera. Heck, the news media, they were there with cameras taking pictures of it before the state troopers came out. There's more than one person that pulled that statue down. We might have some very strong people that could try and pull it down. That thing was bolted down. It took more than one person to do it. But one person is the only person that's going to be held, quote unquote, held accountable. And the accountability should make you sick to your stomach. We're going to do, quote unquote, restorative justice. What in the world is that? Last time I checked, restorative justice, one of the first items of restorative justice is that the person who did the crime actually has some level of remorse. He has said over and over, the person who tore down that statue, who is proud of it, has said more than once, he's proud he did it and he'd do it again. And he, quote unquote, will pay whatever penalty and pay whatever price is necessary because he's proud of what he did. I have not heard anywhere that he has any shred of remorse. So the citizens of the state of Minnesota should be outraged that we're going to go through a dog and pony show of restorative justice that is not going to have any impact on this person's thought that he did wrong. He will never say he did wrong. And I was asked on camera, I think it was by Channel 5, would you like to be part of the process? And I said, no, not really. You know what? I do. I want to be, whatever the restorative justice panel is that's involved, I want to be on that panel because I am going to be there making sure that the citizens of the state of Minnesota, whose property was destroyed, have a voice in this cockamamie horse and dog and pony show restorative justice. Because there's no justice in this. That statue should be replaced and gone through the proper procedure, going through the architectural board to determine whether that fits in with our mall that we have out here in front of the Capitol. Instead, one person, actually more than one, tore it down. The other ones that were involved aren't going to be held accountable. Once again, where's the accountability? But we here at the Senate are holding people accountable. That's what this report is. And I think we should also hold accountable anyone who is doing this lawless behavior and getting away with it. Because that piece of property, if we went, Senator Howe, if you and I went and got a rope and threw it around the statue of Hubert H. Humphrey and tore it down, I guarantee you we would be in jail the same day. And we would be on charges the same day. This is all political. When people say, well, there's politics going around, that's St. Paul is all politics. You're darn right it is. The county attorney is playing politics. He's not holding people accountable. If we did that, Senator Howe, I guarantee you we'd be paying a lot of money out of our checkbook and we'd be spending a lot of time behind bars. And I like you, Senator Howe. You sit next to me on the Senate floor, but I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with you behind bars. Members, we need to hold accountable the branches of government that are not functioning properly. And that's why we're here today. Thank you.
Senator Osmick, to two of your points regarding consequences, the vast majority of those who were arrested as a result of these riots have had their cases dismissed with no consequences whatsoever. So I think your point on catch and release is probably very valid. The other point that I wanted to make, where you were talking about the state property that was damaged, that was a felony, and the price tag to repair that state-owned property is in excess of $150,000. And I think that's an important point to remember. Senator Yazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to follow up on Senator Osmick's point, again, I have documentation in front of us from a news article in the Star and Tribune dated October 16th, and it says, I quote, internal emails show that the administration of Governor Tim Walz decided early on not to restore the 10-foot bronze statue of the explorer Christopher Columbus that was torn down by protests in June. So one person, administration, is deciding that process should go through a committee or whatever it should be, but not one person should be able to say that statue is not going up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Yazinski. And to your point, the proper entity, I should say, to address the issue of whether that statute goes up or down is not the governor of the state of Minnesota. It is the Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board. Any other members that wish to make any comments at this point? Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And many times what I've heard is that I hear a lot of people respond, yeah, we had a lot of destruction, but at least no one got killed. Well, I just wanted to bring up on page 6, it outlines that there was actually 3 deaths during this riot. It looks like Calvin Horton Jr. was shot near Cadillac Pond. It looks like an unidentified person was murdered during the riots and his body burned in another pawn store. And it looks like the Minneapolis Department Assistant Chief and Deputy Chief were flagged down by a motorist who found a deceased woman in a car, and that it was determined that that woman was victim of a homicide. Now, I don't know about anyone else, but I have seen nothing, no follow-ups in any of the media, no follow-ups anywhere as to the turnout of those 3 individuals that lost their lives during these riots. There was numerous people injured, police, firefighters, but we lost 3, what I would believe, residents of this state. They lost their lives during this riot. So to sit here and say, well, at least no one lost their lives, that's more misinformation that has gone out about what happened during this time period. And I think we need to remember, and we need to do something to prevent this type of stuff from happening again and ensure that more lives aren't lost when I think it's almost inevitable that this will probably happen again, like you said, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
Thank you, Senator Howell. And you are correct. There are people who died as a result of these riots. And in addition, I would mention that law enforcement had many documented instances of projectiles being thrown at them, like bricks, bottles full of cement, and in fact shot at during the riots. And that is something that appears in the report, of course, but I don't remember seeing a whole lot of information about the danger that our law enforcement officers were put in when they were attempting to quell these riots.
And Mr. Chair, if I could, just one follow-up. I read a newspaper report of a retired National Guard soldier that I served with that had a medical emergency and needed to get down here for treatment, and because the airspace wasn't safe, could not get flown here to get the medicine she needed. And to this day, she is now she's paralyzed because she couldn't get the medical attention that she needed to get. So there are other catastrophic things that happen to people during this riot that went unreported, and I'm sure she's not the only one that happened to, but I just needed to bring that up, that there's catastrophic things that have affected people very, very bad just because of what happened during that period of time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Howell, I remember reading about that particular incident, and it really is sad. If that woman had reached the medical providers to help her with the disease that she was fighting with, they figure that she would have been fine. But as a result, the airspace around Minneapolis was closed, the helicopter couldn't get through, and she is now paralyzed. Senator Senjum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Let me go take this off. Thank you for doing this report, and I think this report will stand in history as reflective of the facts surrounding, I think, some of the darkest days in Minnesota history. May 26th or so till June 10th, I believe it was, were some bad days in Minnesota, starting with certainly the death of Mr. Floyd and the aftermath. And I think we've reflected within the testimony that we've had a chance to hear, and also now the written report, what happened, and those facts will stand in history. And then I would say, then what? Then what do we do? Where does this go? How should it be approached going forward? And I think of Minneapolis, and I could add St. Paul as well. The mother city of Minnesota. I mean, we like to maybe slap it around once in a while, but for gracious sakes, it is our mother city. It's a city that you reflected in, I think, comments that I was listening to on the way up.
an important part of our state, and what happens in Minneapolis affects us all, and it really does. And I think we see a city right now that's that I have a lot of concerns about. The economic vitality of that city. How would you like to be on the convention bureau of the city of Minneapolis and try to sell that city to any prospective conventions that might come to Minnesota, which are important because they drive their hotel industry, they drive the restaurant industry, they drive a lot of other things. And yet I think even today, COVID included, of course, we've got some problems and concerns about the future of that city. And I'm not sure what the property values are, what the tax base might be, but I would dare to believe that the business property tax associated with the downtown Minneapolis area that comes to the state of Minnesota is pretty substantial. And as those values decline because of everything that's happened, including what's reflected in this report, that has to be concerning to all of us. Mr. Chair, I look at page 44, item 4 there, and this is kind of what I wanted to just talk about going forward, because what's happened, it's unfortunate. Many decisions had to be made rather quickly, I suspect, some for the good and some for the bad, and it's easy, I think, to be critical, but again, I would also suggest these were difficult times for anybody that had to try to manage them. But just looking at Minnesota, at number 4 there, it says the Minnesota Department of Public Safety should develop a comprehensive plan in cooperation with cities, counties, and the Minnesota National Guard to prevent and address rioting. I would go a step further with that recommendation, and I go back to an experience that I had through the mid-'80s going into the early 2000s. We did have a Minnesota Emergency Response Commission, and it existed under federal law and ultimately under state law to deal with preparation for emergencies in Minnesota. And we had a state commission, and we had 8 regional review committees which would look at the planning that was being done largely by police and fire and the medical side, but others as well. You know, where do you get food and things like that? So they brought in a lot of the private sectors, a lot of the nonprofits to deal with how do you deal with a major emergency. And of course, in those days, as we talked about that, we were talking about major chemical disasters, we were talking about floods, we were talking about tornadoes, those kind of things. And as Senator Howe knows, we call it the all-hazard plan. And we looked at all-hazard planning around the state of Minnesota with an eye not only of the agencies, be they state or local, but with an eye of the citizenry. The citizenry itself was an important and vital part of doing this, because I will tell you, until you get the citizens probing a little bit into what agencies are doing and testing their logic on a lot of these things, you don't get the right answer. So I would suggest, we don't need to do this, but the report's written, but as we think to the future, I believe we need another state emergency response commission made up of citizens, of agencies, state and local, that take another look at how we address these things. I never heard of anything like mutual aid being called for by either the state or Minneapolis or St. Paul. Maybe it was, I don't know, either at the fire level or at the police level or at the medical level or at any level. And that simply tells me that as it was, this whole operation occurred with not too much of a planning format in place. It was, this is happening here, we got to respond. This is happening there, we got to respond. And of course, that's the way you act. But I think we could have brought a lot more resources to bear, probably in a much more organized fashion, had there been an all-hazard plan which dealt with this kind of event. And again, not only for Minneapolis, St. Paul, I think Rochester ought to have one. I think probably every major city ought to have one at least, where these kind of instances may potentially at least occur. So that's my comment going into, going forward on this. The report is there. Thank you for doing that. I will never forget I don't remember his name, but the Minneapolis police officer, when I asked him, could you have saved the District 3 station? And he said, yes, we could have saved it. And yet, we the collective decision makers of that time, let it go. And that affected the whole world. It absolutely affected the whole world. When that went down, the world knew that they could get by with this if they just did it. And they did it not only in Minneapolis, but in cities across this country and to some extent across the world. So what happened here in Minnesota is, one of certainly dark days in history, but I think days that we have to learn from. And I think we can do better, and I think we can do better, at least initially, by being a little bit procedural on this, talking about how do we develop emergency plans to deal with the riots in Minnesota? How do we involve the citizens in that process? Because I think that's just absolutely imperative that without that citizen eye on the development and execution of these plans, you don't have a good plan. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for doing this. Thank you for all the staff for assembling the notes and putting this document together. I do definitely think it needs to go under the Minnesota Historical Society because we need to learn by these kind of events, and hopefully we will. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Senjum. Senator Yazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to get a little bit off topic, but kind of on topic. First of all, what happened to George Floyd was terrible, and I agree with that. But what the light it shed on our law enforcement is my concern across the state. And I just have to make a comment. Officer Eric Matson, who just returned home on Monday, August 19th, Officer Matson was shot on a fairly routine call, responding to a suspicious person in a backyard back on January 6th, so almost 10 months ago. He just returned home on Monday. That officer and his family, what's happened to them, and how their lives have been turned upside down to a routine call, an officer in greater Minnesota. And I know after all the lawlessness happened and the people were frowning upon our police officers, and it was terrible. But every single day a police officer responds to a call, they put their life on the line. And that cannot be expressed enough of what our law enforcement are here to do to protect us. And again, Officer Eric Matson and his wife and his 2 daughters, what's happened to their life because of this is very tragic. And I don't know if Eric will ever live the life he had before. He's recovering well, but what happens to our law enforcement, we need to make sure we're out there supporting our law enforcement, not only in rural Minnesota, but in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So I think we definitely need to think about that as we go through this, how really valuable our law enforcement are. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Yazinski. Again, I will directly mention the Minneapolis City Council. I think that in large measure what has happened is reflected in the riots because of the way the Minneapolis City Council has decided to handle their police department. And I can tell you in the area where I live that I affectionately call Cornfield Country, we view our law enforcement agencies, local police, the sheriff, with great affection. They do protect us. And somehow, some way, the city of Minneapolis and their citizens are going to have to come to the conclusion that they also should be supporting their police and their local law enforcement. And if you do not, then these riots that occurred the end of May and first part of June, and the lawlessness that is continuing to date, is exactly what you get. I do not see any other members that wish to speak. Senator Senjum?
Mr. Chair, I just want to follow up on what you just said, because, and we're from all over the state of Minnesota, but I will tell you, and it concerns me greatly, I will tell you, in the last couple of months, I've heard a lot of people in the city I live in say, I'm not going to go up there. I'm not going to go up and have that dinner. I'm not going to go to that sports event. I'm afraid to go to Minneapolis. And that is a horrible kind of commentary that we hear, and I'm going to believe others around this table hear the same thing. Somehow, some way, this city has to recover, and I think you said it best. It all happens at the city council level. They have to know that this is affecting them in many, many ways, and the reputation of their city has been tarnished, and it's going to be hard to get it back, but it's on their backs to do it. And so thank you for saying that. I just, again, want to reflect comments I hear from 75 miles south. I'm afraid to go to Minneapolis.
Thank you, Senator Senjum, and I will indicate that, yes, I have heard the same thing. I have had, as recently as yesterday when I was speaking to a group, that one of the things that they talked about is their fear of going to Minneapolis and their fear of not being safe. And they are tuning into the lawlessness and the violence that is occurring in the city of Minneapolis. And it's going to be up to, in my estimation, the citizenry of Minneapolis are going to have to express themselves to their city council and to their mayor that what their locally elected officials are doing with respect to law enforcement is not acceptable. Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to piggyback again on Senator Senjum, what he said, but first of all, Senator Newman, Chairman, I would appreciate thank you for the meeting today, and thank you for the opportunity to get together to talk about this report. Thank you for those of your staff and our research putting this information together that comes from different sources all over. But in regards to what Senator Senjum just said, I received a call from a gentleman and his partner who live in my district but own several grocery stores, in fact, 3 grocery stores, 2 on Lake Street, 1 on West Broadway in Minneapolis, and 2 of his grocery stores were totally decimated. And he basically told me that he had called the governor's office, he'd called the public safety, Harrington, and he got no justification or no clarification as to his questions and concerns. Because the questions were, if I rebuild my grocery stores, will you guarantee that these will not be burned down again? And of course, that's almost an impossible question, because that's the question he sent to me too. And I said, there's no guarantee that this will happen. He said, well, Senator Anderson, why wasn't there proper law enforcement in place? He said, you know how much money was spent to build my business up and how many times, how long I've been there? And I said, no, I don't know. But I look in the Street report here, and I see that over $500 million in property damage occurred in Minneapolis, and over 1,500 properties were destroyed during these riots. And as it says here in this report, in comparison, this is almost 3 times as many businesses that there are in the entire Mall of America. And that's phenomenal. I cannot even believe it. But really in getting back to the gentleman's concern was, where was the government, where was law enforcement, where were those people who were in leadership that were supposed to keep my businesses safe? And if you read on page 36, it's quite embarrassing almost when you read some of the bullet statements. Colonel Langer, who we had before our committee, admitted there are deterrent effects towards a police presence being arrested and being held accountable through the court system for committing a crime. The second bullet statements, if they would have arrested the rioters on the first day, then they would have prevented most of the damage that occurred, because the rioters would not have felt emboldened to cause destruction. And the third statement is 2 of Governor Walz's staff texted each other stating, Minneapolis Police Department has no plan, especially to arrest anyone. The fourth bullet, Governor Walz's administration does not usually arrest people who are illegally protesting on the freeway. And then the Commissioner of Public Safety stated that the plan was to engage rioters trying to damage the state capitol building with verbal de-escalation techniques as is consistent with community policing approach. The Commissioner of Public Safety continued, the goal is to try and talk them out of doing the criminal activity as no one gets arrested or goes to jail. And police officers stated it was the Commissioner of Public Safety who gave the orders to release rather than arrest rioters. And it's already been mentioned, Mr. Chair, that the number of people that were brought in, the number of people that were arrested, compared to the number of people that were actually there, the rest were infinitesimally small, and yet I get my people from my district saying, where were law enforcement? Who gave the orders? Who refused to give orders? Why wasn't my businesses? And if I want to rebuild, am I going to be assured that those people who are in charge are going to protect me again? So it's very troubling. The bullet statements here are accurate. They've all been backed up with comments and documentation. So I just, again, thank you for this report, but Mr. Chair and others here at the committee, we need to do as much as we can to make sure that our law enforcement are there and that they take the bull by the horns when others won't and go forward and protect our businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. Senator Ingebretson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to end with this. I think it'd be unfair if we don't at least bring up the point that I think if they were here would bring up, the other side of the aisle would bring up, and it's all over the place. You all see it, you all hear it, you all read about it, and they would say that what's being forgotten here is racial equality. And we're all running elections now, and I've been asked about that several different times, and I'm very, very concerned about things that I hear where you know, send your son or your daughter out and be careful for the cops because they hate you, they want to kill you. We've even now in Minneapolis, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but I understand with the budget cut to the Minneapolis Police Department, they've taken these student resource officers, in other words, the uniform officers, out of the schools, and you all remember the hard work we've all done to try and fund those programs, and we know having a uniform there is good, and all that kind of an attitude is really unfortunate. And my response to people who think and tell me that it's racial, I'll say, I tell them this: we have a Minnesota Department of Human Rights. That is a department that actually we work with through the Judiciary Committee, and they're standing ready. They're always available for any complaints at all. And if anyone were to have a complaint on any officer that was treating somebody, whether it be sex or race, that was being treated unfairly, there is a place to go. If that doesn't work, certainly get a hold of me or any one of our senators sitting here. Whether you have a D or an R by your name, we will see that gets looked into. But I know that's going to be part of the criticism for us not talking about today, and I just wanted to bring that up about racial equality, and it's something that Minneapolis certainly has to deal with. I do know that just recently, and you've seen it in the news, that the Department of Justice has offered to come in to Minneapolis with some resources to help with the police department. I hope they take that. I hope they jump on that. I hope they take that opportunity, and I hope they don't let politics stand in the way of that decision. Because if they do, it's really unfortunate. But they really need some help right now, and I'd be very supportive of that. And I'm sure that Seattle and Portland are going to be the other ones that need some real help. So I just wanted to bring that up because I know that is what some of my colleagues will say is missing in this and has said before these hearings. But there is an avenue for those complaints, and they should know that department exists here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ingebretson. And just note that from the very beginning, the purpose of this joint committee was to inquire into the riots. the issue involving social justice and racial inequality, note that looking into those issues is part of the recommendations of this particular report. And I think it's an important part of the recommendations. But again, that was not the purpose of this joint committee being put together. I do not see any further members who wish to comment, so I will make just a few short comments of my own, and then we will be adjourning. Just to try to put a capstone on how serious and severe these riots were that Minnesota was facing. I distinctly remember when Major General Jensen was in our committee, and I asked him, you know, the entire contingent of the Minnesota National Guard had been called out to address these riots. I believe the figure was 7,200 National Guardsmen. 7,200. And I asked General Jensen, when is the last time the entire contingent of Minnesota National Guard was called out? And his answer was World War II. And to me, that is a startling statement and a startling statistic, that these riots were really serious. They were really out of hand, such that the state of Minnesota ultimately had to take action that they have not taken since the beginning of World War II. So that, to me, is really an important thing to keep in mind as to why this committee was formed and why this committee was put in the task of looking into these riots. The other thing that I do want to mention is that the organization of this report consists of key facts, key findings, key conclusions, and recommendations. The key conclusions and the recommendations in reality are opinions that are drawn from the facts of what happened and extrapolated from that. And anybody reading the report is entitled to come to whatever conclusion or recommendation that they so choose would be appropriate. However, having said that, the key findings are facts. There are over 300 footnotes or endnotes in this report. For every fact that is stated, it is memorialized in the bookends. And so, you know, you may be entitled to your own conclusions and your own recommendations, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Facts are stubborn things, and they are all documented in this report. And I would like that the citizens of this state and the media and the members of this committee to keep that in mind, that the facts that are listed in this book are documented, they are not made up, they actually happened. And I think that all of the recommendations and all the conclusions that we ultimately came to were extrapolated from those facts. In terms of the report, if folks want to try and bring this up online, I've got two suggestions I could make to you, although you could, you know, anyone could get a hold of any one of your senators and they would be able to help you with this. But there is one website, it's leg.min.gov/calendar day. And the calendar day would be today, October 22nd, 2020. You can get to the report with that. You could also go to the Senate homepage and work your way over to what are called joint committees, and you would be able to find the report listed there. But again, the report is public. It will be filed in the committee journal. Ultimately, will be part of the history of Minnesota, and will go over to the History Society also. The final thing that I want to do is I want to thank all of the members of this joint committee that contributed and came in and participated in this hearing. I really think it was important that we did this. And finally, what I want to do is say that the staff that worked on this, can you imagine chasing down over 300 citations to back up the facts to put in the report? That alone it was just an enormous task. And we had multiple staff members working with us on this report, and I just want to make sure that they know that we really do appreciate all that they have done. So let's try and learn from the mistakes that have been made in the past, take a real hard look at the recommendations, and let's see if we can make the state of Minnesota a safer place in the future. With that, members, we are adjourned.